Central to understanding Richard Powers' novel, The Overstory, is a redefined sense of the conflict between the human and the non-human worlds. As Watchman asks, or as Nick asks, as they do the tree sit, what's crazier, plants speaking or humans listening here? And in this novel, Powers is kind of following on that old aspect of conflict versus, instead of thinking about the human being versus self, or the human being versus other human beings, Powers is kind of rethinking the old conflict of the human being versus nature, which was written so poignantly in Jack London's novels and tales of survival in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. Powers here, though, is trying to explore kind of the interdependence of the human and non-human worlds, versus London's sense of the inattention of nature or the outright hostility of the non-human world. Although that sense of conflict between the human and the non-human worlds is still present in Powers' writing, but there's a tension from the very outset, though, right? How do we reimagine ourselves as part of nature? Does the human being have a place of transcendence over nature, oftentimes expressed as a sense of stewardship of nature, control of nature? In what ways do we have the power to begin to understand or imagine nature? And it kind of comes out in Dorothy Brinkman's reading of fiction early in the novel, where as she reads, she's kind of wrestling with life with her husband Ray, and she asks herself, what is this grabbing at my heart like it means something? What gives this pretend place so much power over me? How do we begin to imagine ourselves and our stories and our journeys within this kind of wider world that seems sometimes quite inattentive to us, and at times, quite hostile to us as well? How do we imagine ourselves within that sense of nature? Nile has a transcendent experience of nature as he runs off to the woods as he's trying to figure out what to do with his software operation, where he's going to go next with it. And he goes to the woods, much like Thoreau, and he looks up at one of the redwoods. And as he looks at the tree, he has this sense of smallness against it. He thinks it's too big to make sense of, too big to credit as a living thing. The memory is as dense as if it were just encoded in him, the father, and he hears his father's voice. Think of the code that made this gigantic thing, my Nile. How many cells inside? How many programs is it running? And so Nile has this moment in which the world is kind of laid bare to him, in the ways that he thinks about code. How are the systems, the cells, the interactions within the tree similarly coded, and how do they work themselves out within this kind of distinct non-human purpose that is other than human here? Mimi has a vision of nature and human sense of control over it, as she's beginning to march into one of the points of conflict with one of the logging companies in her work as place as an environmentalist. As she's walking, she has this moment where she looks and sees, but through another gap to the south, lunar devastation runs up the mountainside. That's against the healthy growth of trees. Here it's slashed, doused with diesel, and burnt until even the fungus is dead, then drowned with herbicides so nothing will grow again but this company's monocrop until the soil is dead. That sense of despair in human beings, direct sense of control over nature and acting out over nature and trying to, find the inherent profit within the natural world. And it drives her to despair in a lot of ways as the novel plays itself out. Even Nick is touched by this as he feels the fullness of this world. He, as the artist, he tried to develop these small boxes of bits and pieces of the chestnut tree that grew in his family's yard in Iowa. But as he comes to California, and as he makes his way through the forest that is marked by the logging company, he looks and he sees a grove of trunks 600 years old running upward out of sight, the pillars of a russet cathedral nave, trees older than movable type, but their furrows are spray painted with white numbers, orders for a massacre. So Nick feels this, this sense of the primeval, the old, the ancient forest here, and feels the power of it, but then also realizes, the sense of the modern world intruding, the human world intruding into the non-human as a point of conflict that's here. That sense of conflict is played out in Patricia Westerford's story as well. In her research, as she tries to understand communication among the trees, how forests, how all aspects of the forest interact, and she becomes kind of a celebrated figure through the novel, as she defines her position against the prevailing scientific view, as well as the how the markets see the forest as as pure profit. As Dennis, her partner, says to her, they need someone to speak for the trees, and that is Patricia. And so in her testimony in court at one point, she says, as she speaks of the forest and its decay, rot adds value to a forest. The forests here are the richest collections of biomass anywhere. Streams in old growth have 5 to 10 times more fish. People could make more money harvesting mushrooms and fish and other edibles year after year than they do by clear cutting every half dozen decades. And so that sense of that the forest itself produces what it's capable of producing versus what capital is capable of producing, is Westerford's mark of this human versus non-human conflict in this world. It leads her, to the recognition in the end, as the lawyer asks her, why doesn't the market recognize this, value added by the forest? She thinks to herself, ecosystems tend toward diversity and markets do the opposite. She's smart enough not to say this. Never attack the local gods. Each great forest had gone down in decades, and so she already has this sense of defeat. As she looks to the conflict between the human and non-human worlds, and how the human world has marked these forests as things of economic value. It's a strange contradiction that finds its way into the last line of her book, as she notes on page 222 in the Overstory. A tree even offers shade to the axemen who destroy it. And this seeming contradiction works its way out throughout the novel, even to the point where as Nick has been arrested with Olivia, and they have been taken into custody for tree sitting and blocking the way of the logging company. And then as he's in the cell, he has a dream of the family chestnut in his yard in Iowa. And as he dreams, the trees laugh at him. Save us? What a human thing to do. Even the laugh takes years.